The courtroom was filled with the usual hum of whispers and shuffling, the air thick with anticipation. Jasmine Carter, a young black woman in her early 20s, stood tall at the defendant's table, her posture confident yet calm. The judge, a man known for his sharp tongue and rigid demeanor, watched her with a raised eyebrow, already sizing her up. "You're a little young for all this, aren't you?" The judge's voice echoed across the courtroom, a smirk curling at the corners of his mouth. A teenager trying to lecture this court. "What exactly makes you think you're qualified to be here today?" Jasmine held his gaze, unflinching. Her voice was steady, betraying no fear. "Your Honor, I am here to present evidence, facts that are critical to this case. My age doesn't change that." A ripple of murmurs spread across the courtroom. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Facts?" he repeated with a sneer. "What kind of facts does a teenager like you have that would even matter in a court of law?" Jasmine's expression didn't falter. "The kind that can prove the innocence of the accused, Your Honor. The kind that were gathered through months of investigation, surveillance and data collection, all of which were authorized by the proper authorities." The judge raised his hand, as if dismissing her claim without thought. "You expect this court to believe your story. You're just a child with no real experience, and now you're going to lecture me about the law?" Jasmine took a slow step forward, never breaking eye contact. "Your Honor, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to speak the truth that this court has sworn to uphold. If you choose not to hear it, that's your decision, but I'll stand by my duty to present it." For a brief moment, the judge's face flickered with annoyance, but then something shifted, a subtle change, barely noticeable. The air in the courtroom seemed to tense. He glanced at his notes, then back at Jasmine, still unsure of what to make of her. The gallery fell silent, the weight of the moment hanging in the air like a delicate thread. Jasmine didn't wait for the judge's permission to continue. She was already in the rhythm of her testimony, speaking with a clarity and purpose that commanded attention. "Your Honor," she continued, "the evidence I've presented here today has been verified and cross-checked through numerous channels. The investigation was conducted with full legal oversight. I am here on behalf of a greater cause, one that demands justice, not prejudice." The judge, his composure clearly shaken, shifted in his chair, trying to regain control of the room. His earlier dismissiveness seemed to fade as he looked down at the pile of documents in front of him, then back at the calm, unwavering figure before him. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice softer, though still carrying a hint of skepticism. "You claim to be a federal agent. Prove it." Without flinching, Jasmine presented a sealed document from her federal agency, her credentials now irrefutable. "Here is the proof you asked for," she said, her voice still calm, though with a quiet intensity that resonated through the room. "I've been in the field for over 2 years, and I'm here to make sure the right thing is done." A stunned silence settled across the courtroom. Even the opposing attorneys, who had once scoffed at her presence, now sat rigid, unable to mask their surprise. The judge, who had been relentless in his doubts, paused. After a long, heavy silence, the judge finally spoke, his voice quieter, more measured. "Ms. Carter, your credentials are in order. I will admit this is unexpected." Jasmine's eyes remained focused, but inside she could feel the shift in power. The room, once filled with tension and disbelief, was now rife with silent respect and perhaps even awe. The judge took a deep breath, then leaned forward, his tone more neutral, less dismissive than before. "Proceed with your testimony, Ms. Carter." Jasmine nodded, her heart steady. She knew this was not just a victory in this courtroom. It was a triumph of quiet dignity over the weight of preconceived notions. In this moment, her composure, her strength, had shifted the balance. The courtroom was no longer a place for mockery or derision. It was now a place where truth, however inconvenient, would be heard. The room was quiet now, a heavy, tense silence. hanging over the proceedings. Jasmine stood, composed, at the center of attention as the judge sifted through her documents, his earlier smirk completely erased from his face. His hands shook ever so slightly, a sign of the realization dawning on him. For the first time, he was uncertain. "Ms. Carter," the judge finally spoke, his voice now lacking the usual disdain. "Your qualifications are indeed impressive. I apologize for questioning you so harshly." Jasmine nodded, but her gaze remained steady. "There's no need to apologize, Your Honor. I understand that my presence here was unexpected, but the facts remain. The truth remains." The judge's eyes flickered to the defense and prosecution tables. "This is not a court for theatrics, but what we've heard today has been nothing short of astounding. The defendant's case is now under a new light." Jasmine didn't flinch at the judge's words. She hadn't come here for validation. She had come here to do her job, to do what was right, to make sure that the truth, no matter how inconvenient or difficult, found its place. The opposing attorney stood up, fuming with frustration. "Your Honor, we object. This testimony is unreliable, especially given the unconventional nature of Ms. Carter's position." The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The tension was palpable. Jasmine glanced at the opposing attorney, her expression unfazed. "Objection overruled," the judge responded, his voice firm. "We will proceed." The opposing attorney sat back down, defeated, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Your Honor," Jasmine continued, her tone calm but unwavering, "I stand before you not as a teenager, not as a black woman, but as a federal agent tasked with protecting this country. My loyalty is to the truth, and the truth must be upheld here, in this court." The judge leaned back, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "I admit I underestimated you, Ms. Carter, but you've earned my respect and this court's respect." Jasmine gave a small nod, her gaze not faltering. The power had shifted. In this room, it no longer rested in the hands of the judge or the opposing attorney. It resided with her, with the quiet, undeniable strength of truth. Let the record show that Ms. Carter's testimony has been accepted and is now officially part of the case, the judge declared, his voice authoritative but tempered with newfound respect. The room fell into a heavy silence, the realization settling over everyone present. Jasmine had not only proven herself in the eyes of the court, but she had also made a powerful statement about the role of truth and dignity in the face of bias and injustice. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the day's session, Jasmine turned and walked out of the courtroom with a quiet grace. She had come here to be heard, to be seen, and in the end, she had done both. But it wasn't just her presence that had changed the course of the trial. It was her unwavering belief in justice and her ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. The judge watched her leave, his thoughts lingering on the woman who had changed everything without raising her voice. The room had been filled with tension, with doubt, but it had also been filled with a quiet transformation. The kind of transformation that comes not from force or anger, but from the simple, powerful act of standing firm in one's truth. The courtroom was still buzzing after the session adjourned, a murmur of disbelief hanging in the air. Jasmine walked out calmly, her every step measured, purposeful. The heavy weight of the battle she had just fought didn't show in her posture. She had expected this moment, expected the resistance, but now it was over. And in its place, there was something more profound: respect. Outside the courtroom, she paused for a moment. The air was crisp, and the weight of the morning's events started to settle in her chest. She stood there for a few seconds, taking it all in, the quiet aftermath of a storm well weathered. She wasn't a teenager anymore. She wasn't just a young woman in a man's world. She had done what she came to do. She had claimed her space, The door behind her opened, and Jake, the young attorney who had previously dismissed her, stepped out. He hesitated when he saw her, unsure of whether to approach. His hesitation wasn't the same as it had been before. Now it was rooted in something else, something like admiration. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice respectful but still carrying the weight of his earlier disbelief. I need to apologize. I didn't expect what happened in there. I was wrong." Jasmine turned, her expression softening. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no satisfaction in his apology, just a quiet acknowledgement of the change that had taken place. "Jake," she replied, her voice firm but not unkind, "you don't need to apologize. You just need to learn." His gaze dropped slightly, the weight of her words sinking in. "I've been doing this for years," he said, his voice low, almost ashamed, "and I didn't think someone like you could stand up to a judge like that." Jasmine's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't think, and that's why we're still here, fighting for what should be obvious." She paused for a moment, her words deliberate. "Power doesn't lie in titles or position. It's in knowing the truth and refusing to let anyone deny it, even when they try to humiliate you." Jake nodded, his expression a mix of admiration and self-realization. He stood a little straighter, his voice more certain. "I see that now. Thank you for showing me that." Jasmine gave a small nod and turned to walk away. She had done what she came to do, and now it was time to leave. She didn't need his gratitude, and she certainly didn't need anyone's approval. She needed only to be seen for who she was, a federal agent, a person of dignity, a woman who refused to be ignored or diminished by those who thought themselves above her. Inside the courtroom, things had begun to settle. The judge, who had once been so dismissive of Jasmine, was now sitting quietly at his desk, scribbling down notes. The power dynamic had shifted, subtly, imperceptibly, but undeniably. His demeanor was different now. He was no longer the judge, who had doubted, but one who had been forced to listen, forced to reconsider. He glanced at the notes in front of him, her testimony, her credentials, the way she had dismantled his prejudices, not with anger, but with truth. He exhaled slowly, his fingers lingering on the edge of the gavel. Jasmine's quiet strength had cracked something in him, a shift he hadn't expected, and across the room the opposing attorneys sat in silence, their confidence now tinged with doubt. They had underestimated her, as had so many before them. But today, Jasmine had shown them that they too had been wrong. A young attorney, once an adversary, now slowly rose from his seat. He looked over at the defense table, where Jasmine's absence was now keenly felt. He hadn't thought much of her before, but now, with her words echoing in his mind, he understood. Power wasn't about shouting the loudest or making the most noise. It was in standing firm when the world around you tried to push you down. It was in knowing your worth even when others didn't see it. And in that moment, he realized that Jasmine's power wasn't in what she'd done in the courtroom. It was in what she'd done to all of them. She had changed the rules without ever needing to speak louder than the truth. The days after the trial passed in a blur for Jasmine. She continued her work, her focus sharp, her mission clear, but something had shifted in the way people interacted with her. The subtle changes were hard to pinpoint, but impossible to ignore. In the corridors of the federal building, there were nods of respect that hadn't been there before. In the streets, people she passed on her way to work no longer looked through her with the same dismissive gaze. They noticed her, and for the first time they saw her not as a young woman, but as an agent, one of substance, one who had earned her place. At the courthouse, things had changed as well. Jake, the young attorney, had taken it upon himself to approach Jasmine during a brief break in the proceedings. He walked over, hesitantly, almost as though he were testing the waters, uncertain of how their interactions would unfold after everything that had happened. "Miss Carter," he started, his tone now respectful, but carrying with it a weight of something deeper. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in that courtroom, about how we see each other, how easy it is to dismiss someone because of assumptions." Jasmine looked up from her brief, her eyes calm and steady. "I'm glad you're reflecting on it." Jake shifted on his feet, still unsure but determined to speak. "I've been doing this for years, fighting for justice, representing clients, but I've never really thought about how my own biases affect the cases I take, how I view people." Jasmine didn't speak for a moment, letting his words settle into the quiet space between them. She wasn't here to offer forgiveness or to ask for any in return. She was here to continue her work, and if others could learn from her journey, then that was enough, I think, Jake continued, his voice growing steadier. "I've been looking at the wrong things. The status, the title, the outward appearance. It's all about respect, and I didn't respect you. Not at first." Jasmine's gaze never wavered. "Respect is something we give, not something we demand. If you learn that, Jake, then you've already made a step in the right direction." Jake nodded, his face flushed with realization. "I understand now. It's not about the position, it's about the person." For a brief moment there was silence, the kind that wasn't awkward, but reflective. Jake gave her a small, sincere smile. "Thank you for showing me that." Jasmine nodded once, her expression neutral but warm. "No one has to show you anything, you just have to be willing to see it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jake standing still, his thoughts heavy with the lessons he'd learned. As Jasmine moved through the hallways, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space, she felt a strange sense of peace. Not because she had made someone see her worth, but because, for the first time, she felt like her worth had never truly been in question. The world had shifted, but it had shifted on its own time. No forceful demands, no aggressive actions. Just the quiet persistence of truth and the slow dismantling of old prejudices. In the courtroom, the judge had made his own quiet reckoning. No longer was he the man who dismissed Jasmine. In fact, he had become someone who found himself reconsidering the way he interacted with those before him. He found himself listening more than he ever had before, seeing things with fresh eyes. He had always believed that the law was black and white, clear-cut. But Jasmine had shown him that sometimes the law's true strength was in its flexibility, in understanding, in the people who upheld it, even when the world tried to knock them down. Jasmine didn't need a public declaration or a crowd of witnesses to acknowledge her worth. She didn't need anyone to apologize for the way they had treated her in the past. Her power lay in her quiet resilience, her ability to walk into any room, any court, and demand nothing but to be heard. And as she continued her work, she realized that the more she reclaimed her space, the more the space around her opened up, not just for her, but for others who had once been made to feel invisible. Power, she knew, didn't lie in the loudest voice or the strongest fist. It was in the steady presence of someone who refused to be shaken, who stood firm without needing to prove anything to anyone. She wasn't just an agent for justice. She was a testament to it. The weeks passed, but Jasmine's presence remained. In the courtroom, in the halls of government buildings, in the streets she walked, she had become something more than just a federal agent. She had become a symbol, not of power shouted from the rooftops, but of quiet, unwavering dignity. It wasn't just Jake who had changed. Others had started to approach her, not with fear or curiosity, but with genuine respect. The looks, once filled with doubt and dismissive glances, were now replaced with nods of acknowledgement, a subtle shift that was, for Jasmine, the truest form of victory. One afternoon, as Jasmine stepped into the courtroom for a new case, she was greeted by the familiar gaze of the judge. This time there was no sneer, no sharp judgment in his eyes. He simply nodded as she approached the stand, his respect now undeniable. His words, though few, spoke volumes. "Ms. Carter, you may proceed." Her presence, now grounded in more than just legal duty, carried weight. It wasn't her age, her race, or her title that commanded the room. It was her authenticity, her courage to stand firm in her truth, regardless of the opposition. As the trial progressed, Jasmine's testimony was flawless. Every word she spoke resonated with clarity, every fact she presented unwavering. The opposing counsel tried to challenge her, but there was no room for doubt. She had proven herself, not just to the judge, not just to the lawyers, but to everyone in that room. And then, when the trial concluded, the judge turned to her. "Ms. Carter, your work today, you've done well. Not just for this case, but for the principle of justice. We'll be in touch." Jasmine nodded, but her mind wasn't on the case anymore. It was on something deeper. She had reclaimed not just her space in that courtroom, but her space in the world. She had fought without raising her voice, without aggression. She had fought with integrity, with patience, with unwavering belief that truth, no matter how hard it was to hear, would always find its place. The courtroom emptied and Jasmine stepped into the sunlight outside. The world, still noisy, still filled with uncertainty, seemed a little quieter now. Her heart, though, beat steady, her resolve firm. She had stood before them all, before the judge, the doubters, the skeptics, and had emerged not only unbroken, but stronger. Power wasn't in domination. It wasn't in making others feel small to make yourself feel big. It was in the quiet strength of knowing your worth, in standing tall when the world tried to shrink you, and in knowing that no matter what, your truth would always speak louder than any insult. As Jasmine walked away, her head held high, she knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. The truth, she realized, was her ally, and with that, she had already won.